Hi guys, this is FNGR. Special thanks goes out to Toon Critic Y2K for putting me in touch with Mr. Bill Newton. Extra special thanks for Bill Newton, the voice behind Bright MAc and Pharynx. We're joined by CountessRose and Quill Stroke. Don't forget to check out my How Not to Brony series, as well as a new video I made called YouTube's 10 Must-See YouTube Channels. It's over on Fan and Frenzy. If you're bored right now, you don't need to be. It covers all the must-see YouTube content out there. Please enjoy this podcast, and if you're looking for a professional voice actor, Bill Newton's Twitter will be down below in the description, as well as a link to the first podcast with Mr. Newton that's up on Toon Critic's channel.
Sound okay?
No, you sound great. Is Ed coming along, or...?
I can PM him.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, editor, your presence is requested.
We should bump the show up to get him in, because I have a friend of mine who just said, every time you have me on the show, I'll edit the podcast for you. And I was like, oh, well, I guess we're going to restructure it around you. Yeah.
Oh, I know about how not fun and sexy editing audio is, especially long form.
I just got done with an hour-long clip.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to be re-editing my reel soon, too.
Yeah, I thought about doing things like Twitch streaming and YouTube stuff, but I realized that I already do tons of editing, and I didn't really need that much more in my life.
Well, to be fair, for streaming, I guess you're not really editing so much, just throwing
It's
it
true.
down.
I was going to say I could straight up stream, but then I would probably want to do highlights of it. I find that some of my favorite and most successful streamers are people that then also have, a following on YouTube. Although a lot of people are moving away from it, it seems like the monetization on YouTube is really going down the toilet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
YouTube is making its own people angry.
Yeah, and I mean, they've been making them angry from time to time for a long time, but this seems to be probably what will... other platforms have come a long enough way that YouTube has dangerously pushed people to where other platforms are viable. It's just like, well, now I don't need you.
No, that's the official answer that we're telling YouTube. However, my personal experience with VidMe very much would like to turn into YouTube.
Sure.
We've got the money now. Okay, now forget about everything we were just talking about. There's another one called BitChute, and it takes you.
I've heard of those.
It takes you a different website when you use the search engine. I'm like, what is this? This is not how a YouTube substitute is supposed to work.
It's true, and that's the problem of corporate consolidation, is that all the alternatives usually get bought by the company who they would compete against. So it's just like, well, we're the one-stop shop. You've got us or something that wants to be us.
Oh, fine. I'll go make my own.
Don't do that.
Yep, and then they'll buy you.
Yeah.
Which is great. It was great for the creators. I'm sure they love it. But it just means that, there's one less thing out there for people to go like, well, I don't want a YouTube. I'm just glad that Twitch seems to be far better for streaming than YouTube Live or whatever the hell they want to call it.
There's acres and acres of ways of streaming.
Yeah.
It's YouTube Gaming, I think it's what it's called.
Right. They basically saw Twitch and they went, we want to do that.
Yeah. God bless them. So I guess we could get started here. I'll do the intro, and if Ed ever shows up, screw him. This is FNGR welcoming you to a very special Limbo podcast. It's the first time we're having a official VA from the show, joined by the following co-hosts: Quill Stroke.
Yowdy, yowdy, yowdy.
And okay, by the way, is that backup taking right now, or?
Actually, you let me. Yeah, I'm recording.
Okay, wunderbar. CountessRose.
Good evening, all.
And this week's King of Limbo, who I hopefully won't forget the name, Bill Newton.
Yay! Clap, 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 clap.
He remembered it.
Indeed. Well, when I have too many co-hosts, sometimes it's a nightmare to get to the guest. Now, I actually studied the last podcast. I wouldn't give you anything like really redundant, so I'm going to take one, then pass it around, and go to Countess, and then go to Quill here.
Cool.
You mentioned on a previous show you worked on Finding Dory.
Yeah.
Were there any projects that you almost got that got sacked, or maybe someone offered you something that they didn't quite have the ability to deliver on?
So far, thankfully not. I've gotten down to callbacks on a couple of projects, but it's funny. I've been very fortunate that most things that I've gone up for, either I never heard that I ever got close. I just went for an audition for a show that I was excited about, or a project that I was excited about, and then I just never heard anything, which means I didn't get it. And thankfully I didn't necessarily hear like, oh, it's down to you and one other person, which can happen. And that's when you sort of get a little nervous. It seems to be nowhere near as bad as on camera, though. I have some friends who are on camera actors here in Vancouver, and one of them was posting on Facebook the other day that they were on a 5th callback, as in they had gone back to read for the same role 5 times. So it was obviously down to them and maybe 1 or 2 or 3 other people, and they just kept putting them through it. And I can't imagine what that's like. I mean, if I get 1 callback, I'm happy, because it means that they've narrowed it down to me and maybe 1 or 2 other people, and then usually based on that callback, they'll make a final decision. I think the only things that there's only one thing that I ever went up for that I was actually super excited about, because I knew what it was for Assassin's Creed Syndicate, the most recent Assassin's Creed. Well, I say most recent, it came out about a year ago. I remember auditioning for that. Now, they didn't call it that. I don't even think they called it Assassin's Creed or anything like that. But the breakdown of the description of it, I'm a video game player myself, and so I knew what it was. I knew that there was an Assassin's Creed game coming, and I knew some of the things that they did. So the way they described it and in the script, and I was just like, ooh, I want to get this. And then I didn't get it.
Aw. Have you ever taken part in a fan dub, or would you consider doing that?
I never have. I might. Hang on. I might be willing to take part. That sounds like an interesting thing. The only concern that I think I would ever have is that, depending on the project, I've never had anybody, approach me and say like, oh, now you can't do this. But I do know of people that have tried to then go and work on projects or side projects or things, who were the people in the official production, and then they've got in sort of trouble. So it's a sort of a dangerous line for us VAs sometimes. I know a couple of people that do, they'll do like an impression, or they'll do their character on an interview or on a show or something like that. But when it becomes a sort of a separate project that the company that owns the character doesn't have control over, that's when, I mean, I'm sure in the past it was never a problem, but these days, big companies like Hasbro and Disney and folks like that, they have very, very tight control over their properties. Understandably so. It's their bread and butter. So it becomes a tricky thing where I'd love the idea of it, but then I would also suddenly be like, oh, am I going to get in trouble? I mean, if I was just to be invited as a guest voice actor who did a totally unrelated voice, then that would be awesome. But if it was, as the characters that I've done, that would be when I'd be like, ooh, I don't know.
Wunderbar. All right.
Yeah.
Quill, you had a question, hopefully?
Yep. Hold on just a second. How does one become a professional VA?
Well, there's a few different ways you can do it, but I mean, there's no official way. I mean, the funny thing is that it's even less of an established way to do it than on-screen acting. Essentially, you need to have some kind of performance background, I find, is the best way to do it. Whether that's local theater, whether you've been, like, I have some friends who are VAs who have been actors since they were children, so that's just but like, for TV and things like that. And they've kind of worked their way through and then explored the voiceover side of things. The easiest gateway to professional voice acting is through an agent. It's basically because it's a small world. It's a smaller world than on-screen acting. And that's just because the nature of the work is that there's less things being made in the animation world and less people who are able to do it, or less people that productions want to do it. So it's a much smaller world, which means that it's kind of closed off, which means that breaking in can take time, and that's made a lot easier by an agent representing you. I think the way I did it was that I had come from a theater and performance background. And then when I moved to Vancouver, I did some coaching just to sort of get myself back up to speed, specifically with a voice coach. And then I started shopping around agencies, approaching them with some samples and my demo, and just sort of said, look, I'm new to this market. Please have a listen and tell me what you think. And the first place that I approached, who I had heard really good things about and wanted to approach, they got back to me and said, yeah, we'd love to represent you. And they will then start getting you opportunities. They never get you jobs. That's one of the misconceptions I find, that people think that that's what an agent does. Agent doesn't book you work. An agent will get notifications from various production houses and projects that are looking for people, and they will put them out to their roster of folks. And it's then on you to perform, and give something that they want. And that's really what the agent does, is they facilitate the ability for you to get your skills in front of the people that are going to give you a gig. And that's a very simple, sort of simplified way of doing it. That process that sounds like maybe it's sort of like this, then this, then this, then this, that took me about 3 years. So, and that was already coming from an acting background, almost 10 years ago now. Yeah. So it's a little different, but essentially starting in some kind of performance. There are very, very few actors who go straight into voice acting. For example, Nancy Cartwright from The Simpsons, who plays Bart. She began her career in performing, specifically wanting to be a voice actor, and didn't explore, on camera or theater or anything like that. I don't know what kind of background she had before that. I think she'd done some work on the radio, but yeah, it's exceedingly rare that performers come to voice acting just for voice acting or just from voice acting. It's much more common that it's an offshoot of just performing in general.
You previously mentioned you can't go anywhere near the World of Warcraft franchise in the movie.
Yeah.
Does that extend to other fantasy movies? Have you had to swear cold turkey on like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter?
No, luckily not. I hold a much sort of dearer place in my heart for those properties, and that's mostly because while there are games that are part of that world, it's never been of the nature that World of Warcraft was. I guess World of Warcraft sort of did it in reverse. So World of Warcraft, they made the game, and then books have been written about it, and movies have been made about it, or a movie. And so that was the way that I consumed it. So I got into World of Warcraft and really got into World of Warcraft, and then they did the books and the movies, and so I was like, if I'm going to draw myself away from the game, it doesn't make sense for me to then sort of throw myself back into the world with books or films. The love that I have for properties like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings are that I enjoyed those as books first, as they were first created, and then they've made films later, which I have also enjoyed, but I find I've never gotten into a book, even when I've been obsessed with a book series, it's never consumed my life because I can literally, it sort of has a finite beginning and an end to it.
Well, there's not
as
the raid
written
culture
word is.
that you don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you've got the beginning of the book runs all the way. You finish the book. There can be sequels. There can be offshoots and things like that. But the thing about World of Warcraft, by its very design and nature, is that it's never supposed to end. They don't want it to, because it makes them money, and that's the business model. And it totally worked on me, totally works on tons of people. And that's the thing, is that I was actually into the game World of Warcraft for the story. I was very interested about where it would go, and where you could go from the story that you absorb, in the first few levels of the game, level 1 to 10, you just start getting very, very simple kind of hints at where the world is going. And then by the time you're at maximum level, you've gone through different parts of the world. You've met different characters. You pick up on you pick their stories back up as you come back into the adventure that the non-player characters in the game are having. And that's what I loved. And part of the reason that I started to step away was not only because I got too involved in just realizing how much time I was spending on it, but also realizing that by the very nature of the game, it was designed for the finality of the each expansion, that it was to be played by massive groups of people, big guilds of, 30, 40 plus people all fighting gigantic bosses together. Now, the thing is that I lived in Australia at the time. And so a lot of the guilds and a lot of the people who played, they were on different time zones. And so unfortunately, that meant that a lot of the time we couldn't get everybody together to experience that content. And that was another part of realizing that I was dedicating far too much of my own personal time to what started to feel like an extra job. And so I realized I wasn't going to get to experience the story of the game the way I wanted to. And that if I wasn't going to be able to get that, then it didn't make much sense to me to keep committing so much time to it and investing so much time in it.
You mentioned second job. You haven't fallen into one of those Minecrafters, have you?
No. So I was going to say it was before the days where if I'd been smart about it, I could have, somehow I could have, spun it off into something. I don't think I would have had the patience to become a gold farmer just because that was the part of the game that interested me the least, was all the mindless grinding for golden items. And it was long before streaming was a thing. So, had streaming been around, maybe I could have gotten a little more entertainment out of it and, perhaps turned it into something of a side career. But then maybe I wouldn't be where I am now. But yeah, it was long before that. So I wonder if I would have turned it into streaming or if it would have just consumed me.
If you weren't doing VA, what would you think you would be doing now?
Ooh, that is a good question. I mean, realistically, what I would be doing would probably be retail or customer service. That's something that I've always done and always been pretty good at. I'm quite a personable person. I'm good with talking to people, which helps in my career as well. Realistically, that's probably what I'd be doing. What I would want to be doing would still be another creative outlet like writing or photography, but those are also extremely hard and grueling industries to become successful in. But so realistically, I would be probably doing retail because there's always retail gigs out there. But I would ideally, if it wasn't VA, it would be writing or photography.
How did you come up with the voice of Pharynx?
That's a good question. I think I got to see a picture of the proposal of the character. Oh, I don't think it was a picture of that actual character, but it was a changeling. So I got an idea of what they look like, and the breakdown kind of, said they're sort of insectoid and have these other things to them. So I tried a couple of things in the room. I think the first voice I tried had a little more hiss to it. So it was just like, they're on our grounds. Which just wasn't as clear. I don't think it was as clear, but I think they liked the gruffness because they had in mind that he was, sort of the last person left to be sticking, to the old ways, and nobody else understood, and everybody else was thinking like, come on, it's time to change with the times. Let's all get on board. And so he was a bit of a grump because he felt that what he was doing was the right thing. So it sort of then came out with the gruffness and the grumpiness of like, I'm doing what I think is right.
The original version you gave there sounded like Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe.
Right, exactly. Exactly. It had that kind of Saturday morning cartoon villain is just like, yes, that's what we're doing. Which
I'm not gonna lie,
it didn't really fit. It would have been fun, and I think a lot of people who were fans of the old, the old 80s morning cartoons, it would have struck a nice little, melancholy, nostalgic note. But I think that it was just that it wasn't as clear, and also it sounded a little too much like it would have been, which is 80s Saturday morning cartoon villain. And they were just like, no, he's a little more, kind of down to earth, grounded character. He's not exactly, rubbing his hooves together and just like, yes, I'm going to take care of everything.
You actually almost sound, what the heck was his name? He was the leader of the mutants from the original Thundercats.
No, it's been too long.
Slide, yes, that was his name.
Right, exactly. It's definitely that thing. It's essentially the cartoon version of the mustache twirling, top hat wearing villain that ties the maiden to the train tracks. it's a little bit Snidely Whiplash. It's that sort of thing, and that works in certain roles. But because he wasn't, I think the idea behind Pharynx wasn't that he was evil. He's not evil. He's misunderstood. He goes about things a different way that everybody doesn't agree with, and so instead of being the sort of the like, yes, I'm going to show everybody, it was more of a just like he's angry and frustrated that he's not understood. Yeah, because the other voice kind of makes it seem a little more actual evil.
Yeah.
See,
Plus, thank you so much for not making it high pitched and squeaky.
Yes,
Right. Yeah.
you.
Yeah. That was another thing. Yeah. I wanted there to definitely be. I think I'm sure I probably made a conscious choice at the time, but also maybe it could have been subconscious. But it was the idea that because he was, he hadn't changed, that he was the opposite of the idea behind the others. Behind, the most of the ponies in the show and the characters in the show, who are much lighter just by nature and by design, that he was more of the basically muddy, like essentially like dirty, muddy idea. Sometimes when I think of characters, I don't necessarily think of them as, this particular person or this particular thing. I might think of them in terms of, colors or textures or things like this. So, that helps me come up with a voice, especially if I don't have any image to base it off, really. I'll just have to kind of use my imagination for, what do I imagine this character is, if I was to have somebody try to describe them just using a list of words.
All right, I'll try one more question here. Let's see. Have there been any roles that you've passed on that you've gone on to regret?
No, I haven't passed on anything, really. I think the only things I've ever passed on were projects where either I had showed interest. Sometimes back in the early days when I was first starting to get going here in North America, I would look for various castings of any kind. So before I was able to join the union or anything like that, I would look around and just sort of see what was happening to just try to get some experience and try to get a feel for what was the general vibe of what's being made. And so sometimes I would see postings and castings and I would express interest, kind of reach out. And then they might come back and sort of say like, okay, so, the project is this and, we're doing this and the budget is this, or there is no budget or whatever it is. And the only stuff I would ever pass on really would be things where I realized that it was something that was being made for commercial purposes, to make money, but that wasn't going towards any of the people who were making it. It's one of those things where depending on the project, like I volunteered for student film. I've volunteered for narrating audiobooks for the vision impaired before. So, I've given my time for things that I'm believe in or I support. But if I see that there's a project that's being made, basically to either pitch a show or make money or get purchased or whatever it is. But then, the people that actually put in the hard work, either the actors or the directors or, people on set or anything like that, if they're not getting compensated, then I don't really want to support that. So that's the only stuff I've ever passed on.
Is there any story that hasn't been adapted into a visual media yet that you would want to see adapted or would want to take part in?
Oh, wow. That is a good question.
Well,
Any story.
favorite book, possibly.
Yeah. I have a feeling like there might have been a short cartoon made of it, but there's a book called The Phantom Tollbooth.
Ooh, that's interesting.
It's like a young adult novel, and it holds a really special place in my heart. It's a beautiful book, and there might have been a cartoon. I seem to recall something like that, but that's one that I would love to see. I feel like it could be done live action as well, but it's very fantastical, very magical. It actually has, now that I think about it, it's got a lot of elements that like the Harry Potter universe has, which is the sort of the idea that magic can be real and that it can exist in the real world. Traveling between the world of reality and another is just, a matter of perspective. Or it's a great book, but it is one of those ones that I feel like cartoon would probably do it the most justice, because there's a lot of things that would be strange to try to shoot in real life, even if you used CG. Mm-hmm. So I think it would. I think that could be a great story. But I highly
look that
recommend the
book
book,
up.
The Phantom Tollbooth, to anybody listening. It's a great book.
I'll make sure to include a link.
What accents do you find difficult if you've done them?
From time to time, there are some that I don't usually need to practice too much, and those tend to be ones like British, Irish, Scottish, various American accents. I do practice them anyway, but when called upon, I can give a pretty passable version of all of those if a character needs it. The ones that I don't struggle on, but have to really sort of try to nail down each time I'm called upon to do them would be ones like French and German. And it's essentially just if it's to be slightly more authentic, because it's very simple to sort of do the like the French accent from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, just be like, it's the French accent like this. Which is in no way realistic, or like a silly German accent, like this one. It's very simple. But to do more authentic versions of those two accents, it takes me. I would need to probably do a little research, look up some clips, look up some some people being interviewed with that accent. Welsh is another one. Welsh accent, I usually have to refresh myself every time I'm thinking of doing one of those. Yeah, those would be the ones that I struggle with. And then there's others that I don't even try to attempt, just because it's not one that I would want to do or want to have coming out of my mouth, and that tends to be like an Indian accent or various Asian accents. I can't do them authentically, and I would also just feel bad taking a job from somebody. Like, I know people in the industry who are those ethnicities and nationalities, and I'd be like, well, I don't want to take a job from my friends, so they can do that.
Certainly. Okay, that was a mouthful. You talked in the past about forgetting roles after auditioning to keep your sanity. Yeah. Have you ever broke that? Like, maybe the first couple times where like your mind, like, I need them to call me back.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm just trying to think specifically of certain ones. I mean, I've forgotten them now, but I do remember that there were certain ones that I went up for, especially early on when I first moved to town, and I was a little more, let's call it what it is. I was a little more desperate to both get work and also, just like make enough money so that I could, pay rent and eat and all of that, because I was looking around for day jobs as well, and day jobs will only take you so far. And so I was really, that's the thing, is it's this weird sort of dissonance that you have to create, where you want the job, you might need the job, but you have to pretend and try to convince yourself that you absolutely don't, because the minute that you are thinking that you really want it and need it, it'll be bad. It'll come through in the performance. You won't be connecting to that role or that performance from a place of authenticity or truth. Unless your character is, a desperate character looking for work, that's not how it's going to come across. And so you have to sort of try to shut that out. But coming to like trying to think about it right now, there's no specific ones. Just because I think also I wasn't aware of most of the projects that I was going up for, so I didn't know which ones they were, so I couldn't be like, oh my goodness, this is a huge deal. Like I really kind of wanted that Assassin's Creed one. Not necessarily because it was super interesting or like, very, very, I only got like 4 or 5 lines. So it wasn't like I could go like, what, the depth of this character is really fantastic. And I'm really loving the exploring that we can do with it. I think that was mostly as a bit of a fanboy. I just wanted to be able to say, I'm in that game. When you play that game, I'm that guy. But yeah, mostly for especially animated shows. Luckily, I've been able to sort of keep to that rule I have for myself where, I go and I do it. And if I don't hear back, then I didn't get it. And I might as well just sort of, let it leave my mind and not worry too much about it. I'll sometimes get reminded. I'll be talking to some of my voice actor friends here in town, and they'll just be like, like I'm recording next week for that new show. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, I read for that show. And there's, I'm immediately very happy for my friends that are working, but there is still a little part of me just like, oh, I wanted to get on that one. Essentially, if I had my way, I'd be on every single show, but it's probably actually good for me that I'm not, because there is a risk of oversaturation. I don't think that would be good for the market. I don't think it'd be good for the art form, and I don't think it'd be good for me.
Do you have any friends that you specifically, maybe not resent, but are like slightly jealous of that this guy's getting a little too much work?
None in town that I know of. I think actors in general tend to try to play that very close to the vest. Otherwise, because it's been true where acquaintances of mine in the industry, when they've found out that I've been in a thing, have then sort of like reached out and gone like, hey, and just sort of like, gently kind of asked like, so how did you get that job? And the answer is always like the same way we get every job, like you audition for it, you go for it, and they like what you did. So, but when that happens, it's sort of just like, oh, okay, like, are we friends or what? There's a lot of, like shop talk, where we'll chat about like, oh, so, what did they end up going with? Sometimes I'm very curious to hear what they did decide to go with if I find out that a friend of mine gets onto a show that maybe I went up for but didn't get. And it might be because I wanted to go some way with a character choice I made, and, my friend made a different choice, and they like the choice that my friend made because maybe it's either a little more realistic or a little more cartoony or a little more serious or a little bit more playful. And that's the thing, is that you'll never, ever, ever know on the day what they're looking for outside of what they tell you they're looking for in the little brief. But that can change from audition to audition. Like they might see 12 people that day, and they might have gone in early in the day looking for something exactly like what they wrote down that they were looking for. And then after 4, they're just like, actually, I kind of like that 4th one. Let's think about it that way now. So, like number 4 is now what we're thinking of. And then, the next 6 or 8 people we're thinking that way instead. So that's the thing. And that's part of why you need to sort of, forget and let them go, because you never, ever really know exactly what people are looking for and why. So you just have to make a choice based on what you have and what you know. And hopefully they either know you and know the breadth of your work and know that you can, vary things up. So maybe if they heard a bit of what they wanted, but they know that you can do other things, they'll be like, you know what, let's get them back for a callback and we'll give them some direction and push them in the direction we're hoping. Or you nail it and they're just like, that's the one, booked. So yeah, it's there doesn't tend to be a lot of jealousy, not that you know of, I guess. I think actors tend to keep it close to the vest. I think it's not jealousy, I think it's more envy. So it's not like, I want what they have. It's just like, I want that too. Like, I would like to also be on that show. I want my friend to be on that show, and I want to be on that show as well.
It's okay if you don't.
Question just popped in my head, and I'm trying to find it.
We could double back.
Yeah, double back. I'm trying. It was in my head, and then it went bye-bye.
All right. Well, mute and write it down if it comes back. Yeah.
Have you ever done anime, and if not, would you do it? And which one would you like to do?
I have done a bunch of anime, actually.
Ooh.
So I've done a couple of characters on World Trigger, which is a newish one. I think it's a couple of years old. I did one character on Gintama. I'm also on the show Tobots. And I also do a character on Beyblade Burst.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I've done a bunch of anime, and in answer to the second part, yes, I totally would do anime. I don't know what. Oh, you know what? It's already been cast, and I was really hoping that it would be cast and recorded up here in Vancouver, but it's being done in LA. I would have loved to have been part of the English cast for One Punch Man.
Oh, they're making an English dub of that?
They are, yeah, but not up here. So unfortunately, I don't get to be involved. But it's being made, and it's one of those things. Like I like certain anime. So I don't mind either way. If I'm in it, I probably will want to watch the dub, but I'm fine with subs as well. I used to, when I was a teenager, I think I was more of a purist, just like, subs, no dubs. But I've found that there are plenty of times where there's very good dubs, and it's totally fine to watch it. So yeah, I have done a bunch of anime, and I think that's one show that I watched and I was just like, oh, I'd love to be involved. I even actually I emailed my agent and said, listen, if they're sort of kicking around and like asking, or like, if any of the studios seem like they're looking for this, put me forward, get me in there. But I never heard anything, and then found out later it's because they're casting it and producing it all in Los Angeles.
Aww.
When you
sorry, Anthony.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, when you made the marker, you said you changed your opinion on subs versus dubs. But was that because you're a VA? If I could be so rude.
No, not really. I mean, I think I think maybe it was not too much time between the two. I think, yeah, maybe it was. And I think that maybe my initial sort of experience with some dubs was like, oh, this isn't very good. I was thinking that maybe like some of the ones I'd heard weren't very good, and I thought, I feel like I could maybe do better. But that's, I think, the arrogance of both just being an actor in general, but also being quite young. So talking like 17, 18, when I thought I knew better about everything. And so I think that, part of that was just that I had been performing already by then, not really VA work. So I think it was just the arrogance of a young actor thinking, oh, I want to get into this because I can do better. Yeah, if I wanted to sort of try to approach it from that same mindset, but with a more mature look at it, I would say it was my actor's idea of being the change I wanted to see in the world. If I was being very generous and very kind to my younger self, it was that I saw that I wanted things to be better, to be as good as they could be, and that, I could be a part of maybe why that was. Again, that sounds super conceited, but
well, the fact that you showed self-awareness is
exactly. I'm fully aware that while that is something that I do believe, it doesn't come off great if I'm just saying that to people. I'm just like, you know what, I saw that there was a need for me. they needed me. So I answered the call. No, it was, I think it was just, that I was a fan of the medium of animation of all kinds, and was super excited to find out that was something that you could do, that could be a job. And I think my opinion probably also changed a little bit more when I started actually doing anime and realizing just exactly what constraints you're under when performing. So sometimes there would be occasions where I'd just be like, oh, that line felt so rushed and there was no emotion to it or whatever it was. And then I've had to record lines where it's just like, okay, we need you to say these 2 sentences in 3 seconds. So say it real fast. You can't pause for effect. There's no dramatic pacing here. We are constrained to this amount of screen time because the animation was done 2, 3, 4 years ago. They're not doing it again for the English dub. So whatever you can fit in, do it. And so sometimes, you'll get a line that does sound. And I when I watch anime now, if I watch it with the dub, I will notice and I'll be like, ooh, I bet that was a few takes. That was a few takes on the day of, that poor actor having to sort of go like, oh, okay. Just like, I have to try to act and race and not make it sound too raced or rushed, but also still try to get across the intention. It can be like patting your head and rubbing your tummy a little bit at times.
Go ahead.
Countess, I think you're up.
Okay, yeah, I did. I found my question. When you go in for a read, do they usually give you do they at least give you a little bit of direction, or are you pretty much just with the brief and you're thrown to the deep end?
From the first run, like from the first go through, it's all whatever you brought. So that's part of it as well, is that you kind of need to go in there with a very clear idea of what it is you think this role should be. Now, they will have an idea in their head, and they're happy to, after you've done a run through, sort of look at it and say like, okay, change it up, make it a little older, a little younger, a little more gravelly, lighter, faster, slow it down, make it more menacing, all kinds of direction they'll throw at you. But from the get-go, unless you have questions. They'll usually ask. A good director will just be like, do you have any questions about the material? And you might just sort of be like, hey, I had a question. It's not here in the script, but, is this character, are they very tall? Are they very short? Or whatever it is. And that can then inform your performance as well. But it tends to be that when you first go in, they are just waiting to hear what it is you brought. So you'll have your sides, the script, and you'll have the brief, which will sometimes be on the script, or it'll be in the email that you got, or whatever it was. And you just go from there. And then they'll bounce some direction off you. And that's usually where you will book the gig. Either you nail it 100% the first time and they're just like, that's great. They'll sometimes still ask you to do another one just in case. But usually getting the job will be when they throw some direction at you. And if you can take it on board and work with it and then really change it to what they want, even if you nailed it on the first one, they now have an example of you being able to take direction, which is going to be very important if you book the job, and also your variety of range. So they'll be like, okay, well, we've got this one that they did when they first came in. And then we've got this second one, which is very different because we threw a bunch of stuff at them. Yeah.
All right. Let's see what we have left here. I probably should have slid off with this one because then I might have a better chance of you answering this. I was going to come back to the Inception, but we're at the tail end here. And I realized there's in time.
I do have one more question when you're done, Anthony.
Oh, yeah. No, okay. Let's make this easier then. You expressed an interest in the Aliens franchise for sci-fi or which any other sci-fi genres that you piqued your interest?
Like which movies or which worlds that those come from?
Yeah, anything else like that?
The Blade Runner universe, although I'm not sure about the new one. I'm gonna have to wait and see. But just the idea of that sort of cyberpunk, not quite dystopian future, but not exactly utopian future, with essentially, a hard-boiled detective in the future. I love that concept. I've even tried writing short stories myself in a similar world or a similar vein. They're not very good, but that kind of idea. I love science fiction. It's probably my favorite genre, and just the I guess it's funny because in a way it's not too dissimilar to fantasy, in that science fiction really offers almost any possibility, because it can just be, like, oh, we need a thing to happen. In a fantasy realm, you could just be like, oh, it's magic, or it's, we're in a completely different, dimension or world where, yes, of course, beasts talk to each other or whatever it is. In science fiction, you could just be like, oh yeah, we invented a chip, and you plug it under your ear, and now you can talk to animals. Boom, done. Solved. I love that. It's, Star Trek, Star Wars, all those worlds. I love that they can exist because they took, technology and just sort of said, yeah, it can do this now, like transporters in Star Trek. It's just like, yeah, we just thought up this thing that, goes like, meow, and dematerializes you and then pops you somewhere else. They then have those people who have had to go and write those books, those technical manuals for Star Trek to somehow kind of explain the pseudoscience. And that's somebody else's job, and that's great. But I love that science fiction just offers you the ability to tell whatever story you want with no limitations. And I love that it tends to, at its heart, still examine, what makes us, humanity, what makes us, people. For all the futurism and all these things like that, what is it that makes us who we are? So, for example, Blade Runner I love because Blade Runner examines, what are we? Are we just the collected memories that we, that we gain through life? Is it better to burn out than to fade away? If you burn so bright, do you burn half as long? Like existential type ideas. And Aliens I really love because it's about sort of the unknown and the horror that can exist within the unknown. And science fiction is my jam.
All right, Quill, your last one. I think that'd be a good, unless Countess has something to follow, we can call that a wrap.
Actually, as he was talking, I came up with another one too, if that's all right.
Go on.
All right.
I'm cool with it.
All right. Okay, this is going to be a pretty simple one. Star Trek, Star Wars, or Doctor Who?
I probably have to say Star Trek. I really do love the others. I honestly haven't watched much of the newer Doctor Who's, and by newer Doctor Who's, I mean anything that wasn't made in the 60s and 70s. I really love the world and the sort of the creativity behind it. There's a special place in my heart because I watched a lot of those 70s and 80s ones as a little kid on ABC television back home, and so I really love those. Star Trek, I think, though, probably holds the biggest place in my heart because I remember staying up way past my bedtime to watch them on TV, and just, yeah, I collected them. I went to conventions in the 90s for Star Trek, and it's funny, I love Star Wars as well, but I think Star Trek just kind of wins out for me.
Okay. And this might end up being, because I'm a 90s kid myself, did you ever play Digimon or Pokemon?
A little. I think I was at just the tail end of the target audience for that. I played a little of Pokemon, and I didn't play. I think I might have had a Digimon, but I think it was just very just sort of tangential. I sort of was around it a bit, but Pokemon I do remember playing a little bit. That was my first kind of foray into collectible card games.
I was talking about the video games.
Oh, the video games. No, I never even played those. Just the cards.
Oh, you're missing out.
I bet, but I also feel like it might be that kind of thing. Like I've just recently started playing another RPG computer game, and it's eaten my whole world. And so it's one of those ones where I'm just like, oh man, I really have to pick and choose what I try to dive into. Otherwise, all of a sudden, people are going to be like, hey, are you still okay? Like, we haven't seen you in weeks. You're still all right?
Calling you up. Are you dead yet? And if so,
yeah, they'll be like, haven't heard from you. Just want to make sure everything's cool, right? Just checking.
People don't disappear in acting anymore because of drug overdoses. It's just video games these days.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just he just faded away, man. He just faded away, man. He really got into that new Pokemon.
What is the game that's making you go off the grid?
It's Divinity Original Sin 2.
Okay.
You should really look into Warframe. That's actually pretty good too.
There have been a couple of people from the My Little Pony fandom that have told me about Warframe. I might have to check it out. But I'm gonna have to sort of just dip my toe, just be like, so what's all this about?
All right, I'll be looking these both up on Steam later.
And we will not see
You'll
Anthony
dip your toe.
3 months.
Oh, nice.
You'll dip your toe, and the next thing you realize it's your whole foot.
Exactly. It'll grab me, and then I'll be pulled into the dark pool of sweet video games.
Nice. All right. I think that's a good place to call it a wrap here, and
all right.
hit stop. Pray like hell, Tuck.
There we go.
And